Later, this is what our chiefs also had to say. They acknowledge their misdeeds, having involved themselves actively in the slave trade business. They were selfish, ignorant, also a deceit on the part of the Europeans. They never made their intentions known to our ancestors at the time. They were selfish, but the Europeans were also.
Would you say that part of it? Because I'm from America, and the only thing they teach us about Africa over there is that, the Africans sold us into slavery. We don't know your culture, we don't know anything. All they know is, Africa, they sold us.
I will get a platform over there one day, and you have media. And tell that
media is terrible. Put it on social media.
It's not true, like. Because we were like this, so.
Exactly.
If you visited me home one particular evening unannounced, and I had only one ball of paper to eat, either we eat it together or I divide it to take half a dinner.
Yeah.
That is when they began raiding. By virtue of your stature, they had guys you don't have, you can't fight them. So they raided the community. And still they needed strong men from the same region to the Americas. And here was the case, they didn't know Kumasi, Techima, Yendi, and the rest. So who do we have to partner?
The chief.
The landowners.
So that was their involvement.
That was their involvement. And later, as they say, some became greedy.
At some point in time.
At the point, some of the communities around, even to this area, was a reformation center. But when they were bringing them from the interior in chains, these people were bad people that they have shackled them. So if you also misbehave in a family, the head of the family or the clan can say, you are so dear, I will take you to the castle.
Oh dear.
Kojo went, never came back. Adon went, never came back.
Exactly.
What was happening? By the time they were around,
they were
gone. Too little, too late.
Wow.
So it was no more a reform center as they perceived. So Massa, we were not selling. We were selling human beings for how to gain God and another. We had an indentured slavery servitude where, for instance, if you owe Madame here, let's say 300 Ghana cities of Ghana today, she's demanding the money, you don't have it as a speech. You have 4 children. Just nominate one, go and work for Madame within the space of, let's say, 6 months. Within that 6 months, that child of yours is no more yours. It belongs to her. Until the agreement was over.
Right. So it's not the same. No.
That is it. All these things, we were doing it. And these people came in and then fuel it and then get more of us. In that case, you had a gun, he doesn't. And by force, you have to go for it. We rely on us. Over there, I hear it's a 1 page or 2 pages over slave trading. And then they highlight more on the role that the African played.
Yeah, instead of what they did. Instead of what they did.
So go and diffuse that.
Yeah, they don't teach us what they did.
Yeah, that is what they did.
We are very privileged to be with you, particularly our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean and the diaspora. And the people from all over Africa, our brothers and sisters from all over Africa. I wish at this point to particularly to apologize deeply on behalf of the chiefs and people of Gold Coast and Ghana for the atrocities, the cruelty, the inhuman treatment that were committed 400 years ago by my ancestors during the Atlantic slave trade, where over 400 years ago, millions of our brothers and sisters were captured, sold, and transported under inhumane and cruel circumstances through Elmina Castle across to the Caribbean and to the New World. On behalf of the chiefs and people of Ghana, I do render unqualified apology, deep from the bottom of our hearts. Deep from our bottom of our hearts.
You know, my brothers, sisters, my people, it's time for us to forgive, man. And I'm not here telling you need to forgive the slave masters, forgive the oppressors, forgive those who have done wicked to us for centuries. Because that's what we're taught in the churches. We're taught to love thy enemy, forgive thy enemy, pray for thy enemy. You know what I'm saying? And God doesn't give grace to the proud. God gives grace to the humble and repentant. So when Jeremiah was praying for his nation, and the nation was completely unrepentant, they were completely stagnant in their ways, they were completely reprobate in mind, God told Jeremiah, stop praying for them. Stop praying for them. He said, every time you pray for them, you pray amiss. He said, every time you pray for them, I will turn my ears away from your prayers. Stop praying for them. At this point, the best thing for some people is the chastisement of the Lord, the wrath of the Lord. You know what I'm saying? Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom. And the people who have perpetrated and done the things that they have done against our people, they don't fear God. They don't fear the Lord, So that will be recompensed. And that beam will be balanced, Everyone was made in his image and his likeness. But the descendants of Adam, the family of Adam, which is the children of God, they was given his soul. The soul doesn't deal with how God thinks. That's why he said, Adam, don't eat from this tree of knowledge. And in parentheses, you can put right now. Because the world knows how I think, and they know my history. They know the things that have happened in creation. But he said, Adam, you will be different. You have my soul. So now you will be made to understand how I feel. And once you understand how I feel, you will understand yourself because you have my soul. And now the reason that the Ghanaian people were deceived. And this is what the explained as by the Ghanaian people, but understood. The reason the Ghanaian people were deceived into selling us who were indentured servants to the Europeans is because of our nature. Our nature is kindness, gentleness, compassion. People popped up on their boats out of nowhere, didn't even speak the language, and we gave them places to sleep. We gave them food. We gave them water. The land we gave them land. We gave them property. We say, hey, you can have this property and you can sleep and rejuvenate yourself on this property. And they took the property, worked with the Ghanaians, offered the Ghanaians pay, and had the Ghanaians building the dungeons where they would enslave the very same people. And the people didn't even know they were building the dungeons. They were just helping them build. And that is our nature. Kindness, gentleness, love, compassion, empathy, righteousness, meekness, humility, peace, faith, hope, love, charity, generosity. That is black mentality. That is who we are. And throughout history, we have been taken advantage of by savages. They don't have respect for how he feels or his laws or his way. They respect his laws as much as they need to manipulate those laws to get success and wealth. That is it. But these people don't want to hear anything about how the Creator feels. They don't want to hear anything about understanding the Creator in his soul. That is rubbish to them. It is trampled beneath their feet. That's why you see they have slave dungeons in Africa called Jesus. The first slave ships sent out were called Jesus and Mary. All of the slave dungeons are overground. They're built beneath the churches. So you see the slave masters worshiping and praying in the churches, while the slaves were dying and suffering right beneath the floorboards. They would come outside the churches and stand on the balconies and look down on slave women that have been stripped naked. And they would say, I want that one, I want this one, I want that one. Bring them to the room. And what was the room? In the governor's office, in the preacher's office, there was a door where he could go, he could take the stairs down to the room, and that is where they would put the girls that the pastors or the governors would rape. Right below the pastor's office. And if the girls didn't consent to sexual intercourse with these interlopers, they would be punished. We saw the women's side of the dungeons and the male side of the dungeons. But if they would consent, and if they got pregnant by the interlopers, then they would now be separated from the rest of the female slaves and made not to suffer. Mental conditioning. We were being conditioned from the very beginning. You see. But being conditioned to being used. Reform your mind. So the point is, we have to come back to our original nature as melanated beings, and especially the Hebrew people, the children of God. And when I say that, we have to forgive. Yes, Christ said, love your enemies. But Christ also said, I am only speaking to the house of Israel. So the love teachings, love your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? The Hebrew people, the whites were not neighbors to the Hebrew people. So who is the neighbor he was asking them to love? Each other. Love your enemies. Who had we made enemies out of? Each other. When the white man came, it was yes, sir. No, sir. What you need me to do, master? Yes, master, I got you. But it was when we came, Jeanette can't slapping each other, fighting each other. So what God says when it comes to the oppressors is that do not take vengeance upon yourself. Vengeance is mine. Let me handle that. But Christ said, I am only here for the lost sheep of Israel. So when he is talking about love each other, love each other, love each other, we was taught that God is only talking about our oppressors. In every scripture in the Bible that deals with love, it only deals with the slaves and the masters. That is incorrect. Christ didn't even speak to the Gentiles. He was only speaking to the melanated people. So if I'm only speaking to melanated people and I'm saying love each other, love your neighbor, love your enemies, the New Testament is how we are to deal with each other. And the Old Testament reveals not only how God deals with his people, but how God deals with our enemies, with the other nations around us. And if only we stay in his covenants, we stay in his laws, we respect him as a father, then the Old Testament details how God deals with the other nations that will come against us if we stay in right standings with him. It's what Christ was talking about. Christ said you must have unity. Christ said a time will come where you will be taken captured. You must have unity. You must be of one mind, not in uniformity, taking away all of the individuality of your different tribes and cultures, but being common and coming together under one mentality of loving God and loving each other. These are the two greatest commands. And by doing this, you form a collective conscience by which God can live and intercede. God can live and fight on your behalf. Because when they attack any one of you, they attack this collective conscience, because all of you are moving as one. That is what Christ was trying to teach us as a people. In order to repair this oneness, we must forgive. The Africans have apologized for their involvement in the slave trade, and it is on every dungeon all over Africa. The apology of the African people that sold us as indentured servants. So when I say, brothers, come home and help your people. I don't want to go to them. They sold us in slavery. This is their fault. Even the Hebrew Israelites who say, yeah, we know we the Hebrews, but forget those Africans. God is going to punish them and kill them. They're Hebrews too. They're descendants of Ham, but the descendants of Shem, who are the fathers of Abraham, they're here too. And they're mostly on the West Coast. If you read the Apocrypha, the Hamites were given the East Coast. And yeah, they settled in the West. But the West, coming to Africa and learning about the history of Africa, the West is where the Hedebu tribe was. So we're fighting for America. I'm America just like everybody else. No, brother, we are African just like everybody else. But remember, the European mentality has reversed our mind. We are blacks. They have reversed our minds. That's why we use nomenclatures like black and white, because they have reversed our way of thinking. So instead of fighting for Africa as we are Africans too, everybody over here looks like us. We're fighting for America saying we are Americans too. We are reversed. If you reverse your way of thinking, you will find your God. And you will understand yourself as you understand God. So we need to forgive our brothers and sisters in the motherland so that we can be open to the option to come home. This your boy, Brother Royce, one time for your mind. We are back in effect with episode 6, the second half of the documentary Alkebulan 2022. So let's recap, okay, a little bit from the first half. The first half of the documentary ended with our historical trip to the slave dungeons of West Africa. And if you paid attention to those last two episodes, episode 4 and 5, where we went to El Minor slave dungeons and we went to Cape Coast slave dungeons, you will see that there was a timeline being laid out. So let's briefly cover that timeline before we get into the second half of the documentary of Alkebulan 2022. So let's begin. In 1471, the Portuguese arrived on the coast of Africa. Okay, they arrived as missionaries, and right now they're simply lodging and sleeping in their boats right now. Okay, but by 1482, the Portuguese have already established conversations with the chiefs that own the land, and now they have been given land to now build, which is where you see the building of one of the first slave dungeons, El Minor. But back then, they're not slave dungeons, they are trading posts. Okay, this is in 1482. All right, 10 years later, in 1492, in Europe, the last Moorish empire falls. See, the Moors, up until 1492, have been ruling in Europe for 700 to 800 years. But in 1492, the last Moorish stronghold falls. And with that, Europe officially falls back under Christianity. It officially falls back under the Pope. And who are the Moors? The Moors are black. The Moors are Africans. So what does the first Pope do when Europe falls back under Christianity? He begins to use Christianity to criminalize African people. Okay, he begins teaching Christianity with the criminalizing, with the pretty much in a way that will legitimize what will later become the slave trade. Okay, so by the late 1400s, now going into the early 1500s, the Europeans that are in Africa now have built a trading relationship, Portuguese, okay, have now built a trading relationship with the Africans. And now they're trading with the Africans for ivory, gold, and spices, okay, in the early 1500s. Now going through the 1500s, okay, they have built 80 forts all along, okay, West Africa. They have built forts in churches all along West Africa, including Christiansborg, which is built in Accra, also Elmina, which is built on the East Coast, which we visited in episode 4, and Cape Coast, okay, trading post, Cape Coast Castle. Now, in 1492, concurrent with the fall of the last Moorish Empire, 1492 is also known for something else. It is known for Christopher Columbus landing in America. So, from 1492, when Christopher Columbus lands in America, in 1607, while all of this building and all of these forts and churches and these 3 big castles are being built all up and down West Africa, in 1607, a British colony, the British colony, okay, arrives in North America from Great Britain. Hey, here's a fun fact. In 1492, when the first Europeans showed up in America, Christopher Columbus, there were 60 million Indians in America. Now, by the time the British colony that would become America would show up in 1607, the population of the Indians in that short span of time had been reduced down to 5 million. That's right, from 60 million to 5 million in 100 years. The wars and all of the different diseases and sicknesses that the Europeans brought to them when they came to the continent of America wiped out 90% of the Indians. So many Indians died in this 100-year span of time that the climate changed. That's right, the earth cooled down because so many humans, 55 million humans, died in 100 years of interacting with the Europeans. Now America, which was settled and had fields and villages, now America has become overgrown. All of the plants and all of the vegetation and all of the forest has grown thick in America, okay? Why is that important? Well, they land there in 1607. By 1609, the last Moor, the last African has been driven out of Europe. So there are no more Africans in Europe to object to what is about to happen, okay? So after 1609, last Moors have been driven out of Africa, nobody else to object. By the early 1600s, remember all of those trading posts that had been built all up and down the West Coast? Well, these trading posts are now converted to slave dungeons. And now in Sierra Leone, Gambia, Nigeria, and in Ghana, they begin raiding the villages for slaves to take to America. So now they need to bring slaves in to tend to the land since the Indians are gone, okay? So in in 1619. Remember that number, in 1619. The first African slaves arrived in America, okay? 1619. And the conditions of slavery are so horrible and so terrible that 60% of the slaves taken into slave trade died before ever making it to America. That means out of the hundreds of millions of Africans that are taken into slave trade, only 40% of them actually made it, okay? From 1634 now to 1642, we're talking about from 1619 to 1634, the Portuguese is booming, okay? So by 1634 now, between 1619 and 1634, the Europeans are fighting over these posts because it has become such a booming business. So from 1634 to 1642, okay, the Dutch have now conquered all of the Portuguese territories, all of the Portuguese, okay, slave dungeons, all right? So by 1664, slavery is in full swing, okay? And it is actually the Dutch, okay, in 1664 that retrofits this Portuguese castle of Cape Coast into an actual slave dungeon, okay? That is in 1664. Now, in 1775, the American Revolution in the Americas have begun, okay? And further enough, interesting enough, slaves were actually allowed to enlist in the war with the promise of freedom. So now that the American Revolution has begun and the Americans are fighting back against the British, they don't like the taxes, they don't want to pay to the crown, okay? Now that they're fighting back against the British, they now tell the slaves, hey, if you fight for us and we win against the British, you will all be allowed to go free, okay? This is in 1775, all right? In 1783, we know 1783, and if we don't, July 4th, 1783, America's independence. America actually wins the American Revolution against the British. And what happened to the slaves that were promised their freedom if they helped the Americans fight against the British? They are returned back to slavery, okay? And that is why most of the Africans chose to fight on the British side in the American Revolution, okay? So now, remember this, I need you to remember this, in 1783, the Americans, the British colony that came to America is no longer a British colony in 1783, okay, with the help of France and with the help of Spain, okay, Christopher Columbus was a Spaniard, with the help of France and with the help of Spain, okay, the British colony is no longer a British colony, they are now America. This is in 1783, okay. Why is that important? Why is that important? Why is that important? Okay, because from 1803 to 1818, the Europeans actually begin to abolish the slave trade. That's right, they actually begin to abolish the slave trade. And this is led by Great Britain. Now remember, the British colony in America have just got into this big war with Britain, which is the military superpower, and they won. And what is the main economic backbone of this newly freed British colony, now calling themselves America? The slave trade. The slave trade is the economic backbone of this now freed British colony that is won against Great Britain. So now what does Great Britain do? Great Britain begins leading the abolition of slave trade for all European colonies. You get it now. So the countries that began abolishing slave trade between 1803 to 1818, the first countries are Denmark, Great Britain, Sweden, and Netherlands. The last country is the US and France. US and France are the last countries to abolish the slave trade, okay? Now, did the slave trade end cold by 1818? No, not at all, okay? During the 1800s, Britain would continue to enforce what they now called the anti-slave trade law, okay? And those slave trade to America had been completely abolished by 1814. America and France would continue to smuggle slaves out of Africa all the way up until 1865. That's right, slave trade was abolished by 1814. But between 1814 and 1865, America and France smuggled out another 1.8 million slaves, okay? 1.8 million slaves were smuggled out. So yeah, America loves their slave trade, right? Okay, 1,287 ships are stopped by the anti-slave trade laws, okay? But even with those 1,287 ships that have been stopped, still another 1.8 million slaves are smuggled into the Americas, Cuba, and Brazil, okay? And actually the slaves actually continue to be smuggled into Cuba and Brazil all the way up until 1880. The only thing that stopped the slave trade in America was the abolition of slavery by Abraham Lincoln in 1865, okay? Even though it was abolished by 1816, okay? 1814. Okay. So, remember I told you that 1783 is an important date. Why is 1783 an important date? Well, on July 4th, we all put on our American flags, we get our fireworks, we get our banners, and we all say Happy 4th of July. And the 4th of July is when America got their independence from the British colonies. So why is that so important for us? Because we know we didn't get our freedom till 1865. So why is 1783 important for us? When they were celebrating independence on July 4th, 1783, we were still on the slave plantations, okay? So why is that important to us? Because in 1834, Britain outlaws chattel slavery. That's right, Britain abolishes all slaves in all British colonies in 1834. Well, how come slavery in America wasn't abolished in 1834? Oh, that's right, because in 1783, America declared and won independence from Britain. So, while slave trade in all British colonies is abolished in 1834, America continues slavery all the way up until 1865 because they are no longer a British colony. So, who are the British colonies that have slave trade abolished in the world? Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Virgin Islands, okay? The Jamaican Islands, these are the ones who actually have their freedom in 1834. We're still in chains. Listen, I'm not saying that Britain is the superheroes of the story. I am definitely not feeding into the white savior complex, okay? Yeah, Great Britain was the one who enforced the abolition of slave trade and later on the abolition of chattel slavery, okay? But don't think that it didn't come with a price, all right? In order for them to enforce the anti-slave trade law, they had to build bases in stations along the East Coast. And this was the same thing with the abolition of the chattel form of slavery. They had to build more bases and more stations throughout the west of Africa in order to enforce these laws, okay? What comes with these bases? Well, they didn't set the slaves free from chattel slavery to be able to do as they will, okay? They pretty much went from chattel slavery to colonization, okay? What is the definition of freedom? The freedom to decide your own destiny. So it don't matter if you have certain liberties. If you're not free to decide your own destiny, then you are not free, okay? And that's where the split comes in, okay? That's where that's where the split comes in, okay? Because they figured out that, hey, well, chattel slavery, if we're beating them every day and killing them every day and raping their children and ripping their families apart and tearing them apart every single day, even the most weak-minded of individuals will fight back eventually. if you abuse a child enough, that child eventually will fight back, okay? So they came up with another idea. See, beating and whipping the slaves and abusing the slaves every single day, that is exhausting. It takes a lot of effort, okay? And there will continuously be rebellions, there will continuously be uprisings, and every war, every skirmish, okay, costs money, all right? It gets expensive. So they came up with colonization. And what is colonization? Listen, all you have to do is follow our rules, follow our laws, okay? We're gonna relegate you to one position in society. And as long as you stick to your position in society, whether that be the narrative we paint for you, whether that be the image we give for you, or whether that be being an economic load bearer to build for us, okay? As long as you stick to where we have relegated you in society, we won't beat you, we won't rape you, we won't abuse you. You'll just have to pay tribute to Caesar. And that tribute can be anything. It can be taxes, it can be labor, it can be a child, it can be a wife, it can be whatever. But at least it won't be every single day. And hey, the only time we'll whip you or beat you is if you step out of the place in society that we have relegated you to be. Or if you stand up for yourself. Okay, no matter what the tribute is, as long as you obey and as long as you submit, hey, we'll let you be free to do whatever activities we've delegated for you to do. We'll give you tobacco, we'll give you alcohol, we'll give you little clubs of ours that you can come and party. Hey, maybe down the road we'll let you wear our clothes and drive our cars too. We may even let you have a few of our women. We'll call them the low-hanging fruit, although that comes very, very later on in history. But the point is, colonization and chattel slavery is two completely different forms of slavery, but neither one of them gives you the freedom to dictate your own destiny. So, while Britain is abolishing slavery, slavery was abolished, the slave trade was abolished in 1808, and slavery was outlawed in all the colonies by 1834. Well, between 1821 and 1872, Britain had colonized all of West Africa, okay? They were in the process of colonizing or had colonized most of West Africa. And certainly by 1890, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Ghana, all of the West Coast, certainly by 1890, was colonized under Great Britain, okay? So we're gonna go into two different scenarios here. In one scenario, you have the Ashanti people of Ghana, okay? And from 1872 to 1890, where all of West Africa has been put under rule and tribute to Great Britain, all the way up until 1957, the Ashantis, they fought back. Okay? And the war is called the Ashanti Wars. And Ashanti Wars is huge skirmishes that the Ashantis would get into with the British. And the Ashanti people, our people, where we come from, the people that were left on the land, they figured out the same thing that a victim figures out when he is being bullied, okay? The bully can say, listen, I won't beat you up every single day. I won't take your money every single day. I won't beat you within an inch of your life every single day. But I expect you to do my homework. Whenever I want your lunch money, I expect you to give it to me without complaint. I expect you to let me treat you however I want to treat you. And if you submit, you won't have to worry about me beating you anymore. But if you don't submit, I will remind you that you are still my slave. So as someone in prison may figure out, or as the Ashanti people figured out, if we submit now, we'll be submitting forever. And anytime we step out of line, they can always hit us with the full brunt of slave abuse, okay? Because we're just under a different form of slavery if we don't have the freedom to decide our own destiny. So the Ashantis fought, not once, not twice, but over the course of almost 100 years, they fought in 5 different wars against the British, okay? Even when the other Africans say, listen, if you can't beat them, join them, and join the British side against the Ashantis, they continued to fight. Even when the British invented the machine guns, which slaughtered down scores of Ashanti people in such a short number of time, they still fought. Even when the skirmish and the infraction was something as small as a British man sitting down on the Ashanti stool and parading as king of the Ashanti tribe, they went to war just for that. That's what the victim figures out with the bully. Listen, there's one thing that my mother taught me when it came to bullies. I was always small. I was always the tiniest guy in the room. She said, whether win, lose, or draw, she said, give him hell. Never make it easy for him. Anytime that bully thinks about stepping to you, anytime that bully comes to you, that bully has to know in his mind, I am going to be in for a fight. If I just want some lunch money, it's gonna be a fight. If I just want to bump him in the hallway, it's gonna be a fight. If I just want to push him on the ground, it's gonna be a fight. If I just want to pick on him, it's gonna be a fight. And even if I beat him every single time, I'm gonna get tired of being scratched up. I'm gonna get tired of being punched up and clawed on and my clothes ripped and my shirt ripped. So now the bully will say, you know what? I don't even have time for that. Forget this kid, because you never stopped fighting. Okay? But the chattel slavery and the colonization is what will separate the men from the boys. Okay? Claude Anderson, I believe, said something. He said, you can never enslave a people that says that I will die before I submit to slavery. A person who says, a people who say I will die before we submit to slavery cannot be enslaved. But a person who says, well, hey, let's go to the Americas, where up until 1865, for almost 250 plus years, we were beaten, raped, destroyed, pillaged, families torn apart, killed, murdered, sodomized, burned, torn to pieces by horses, okay? Our wives raped, children raped. And now finally, the slave masters come and say, listen, we're not gonna beat you anymore. We're not gonna whip you anymore. We're not gonna rape your children anymore. We're not gonna take your wives anymore, okay? As long as you obey our laws, as long as you obey our rules, and as long as you pay tribute to Caesar, whether that be labor, money, or, hey, whatever the request may be, okay, we will not whip you or beat you anymore. Well, after 250 years, to those people, that would be a sweet deal. Hell yeah, all right. And they say, you know what? We'll be your government. As our citizens, you don't have to worry about the responsibility of being a self-governing people. We'll run the government, okay? We'll take care of all of the hassles and all of the other people that will come to attack you and brutalize you like we did. Well, as long as you're with us and as long as you're a part of our colony, then you become a part of the treaties that we have with any other person that will come to brutalize you. So pretty much brutalizing you would be like brutalizing us. So you get the security of being under our protection. All you have to give up is your freedom. Okay? So the Ashanti people continued to fight back, and eventually in 1957, they won their independence from the British. The British said, that's enough, okay? We got too much going on all over Europe. We got too much going on all around the world to keep dealing with continual uprisings over and over and over again. We're done. You guys are free. In 1957, Ghana became one of the first sub-Saharan African countries to gain their liberation as the Republic of Ghana. And in 1998, they joined the Emancipation Day celebrations of the Caribbean people who had been celebrating since 1834. Now in America, we gained the idea that, well, as long as we submit to the rules and submit to the laws, and as long as they gives us access to a court system so that we can fight anything that we deem is unethical or wrong, hey, anything is better than being whipped, anything is better than being beaten. We'll take whatever crumbs we can get.
And now, when they do come and kill your children, or they do come and kill your leaders, or they do rape your wife, or they do rape your children, or they do any of the things that they used to do when you were under chattel slavery and that they promised you wouldn't see much of now that you're under a more liberated form of slavery, they can always say, well, hey, you broke the rules, you broke the laws, so it's your fault. If you play by the rules and you break by the laws and you submit, then you wouldn't have to worry about those things.
And Luther Brooks came to us to tell us about what some of the plans were for Overtown and the black community. And he brought his maps and everything and showed us, this was about 1959, 1960, how that the only way downtown Miami could expand was to expand into what was then known as the Overtown area, a black community.
One of the major changes would be the construction of this interstate highway system, which would displace many homeowners.
The house was in my mother's name, and she received the letter saying that, I don't remember now exactly what it said, other than by the right of eminent domain or something to that effect, we would have to move. And other people, they compared notes, and other people got the same kind of notice.
I'll tell you what we said, the niggas had to go. So they came out and talked to all of the property owners and told them by eminent domain, this property is needed to build this expressway. You know, growth is coming on, and sometimes some people lose, and invariably it's blacks that lose.
It was very rough on my mother. You see, it was her house that she and my grandmother had worked for. And it meant that everything we had was being just taken away. Even your shrubbery that you had cherished and had planted, and you couldn't take that with you.
So what government did was they took a little at a time. First they cut the finger off, and then they cut the hand off, and then they cut the arm off, and pretty soon, Overtown's dead.
Ultimately, the expressway displaced 20,000 people, 50% of Overtown's population.
I-95, which was basically developed to get people from suburbia downtown, and in the process destroyed Overtown and that sense of community.
One of the things that upset people most was an incident involving a white Florida Highway patrolman who stopped a little black girl in South Dade County. She must have been around 10 or 11. Told her that she looked like someone who'd been reported to have stolen some candy. He put this child in his car in the back seat, drove to an isolated area, moved into the back seat with this child, began fondling her. She resisted and cried, but he still proceeded to fondle her. Because she was crying, he stopped, drove her to her house, and told her not to tell anybody and to keep the secret between them. The girl eventually told her aunt. She was living with her aunt and uncle at the time when it happened. Within hours, the Highway Patrol had officers at the house. The child remembered the man's name on the visor in his car, and it was Jones. And within minutes, the police knew who the officer was. The girl identified him photographically.
I guess the thing that outrages us primarily is the fact that this man was a state trooper using his office, his car, his uniform to place a child in a very compromising position. And we teach our children to trust the police, and this makes this kind of an incident particularly abhorrent.
A deal was worked out with the child's family and this man to pay for her mental health and some other minor amount of money. That was the agreement. He left. He ran away. We don't know where he is today. Never did anything to restore this girl's mental health. Another incident involved a young man, a black man named Randy Heath.
who was urinating in the warehouse area of Hialeah. He was with his sister or some other relative, stopped the car, and while he was in the process of relieving himself, he was approached by a white police officer who put his revolver to the man's head and told him not to move. Well, the man didn't turn his head, and the gun went off and blew his brains out.
For months, the black community has been closely watching the Larry Shockley case. Shockley, appearing last week before the Dade grand jury, was suspected of manslaughter in the death of Ray Heath, a black man that Shockley thought was robbing a Hialeah warehouse. The grand jury yesterday said there was not enough evidence to indict Shockley, and that decision has outraged black community leaders.
An officer admitted having made a mistake, and then for the grand jury to be able to walk away and say even though they felt there was cause, they could not find sufficient cause to indict him. I think it's an indictment on the black community, and I think that the black community is slowly but surely coming into the knowledge of the fact that we are just a forgotten people in this area.
Then there was the LaFleur case. Mr. LaFleur was a Dade County school teacher, and the police raided his house looking for drugs. Turns out it was the wrong house. But Mr. LaFleur was beaten severely. He eventually died some years later of his injuries. But the wrong house raid, as it was called, also incensed the community. So these things were fermenting in the black community before the incident in which McDuffie was killed in December 1979.
What is clear to me, having worked on this, for over a decade, is that Miami's past really is America's future, right? What Miami's past shows you is that even with linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, with, any number of residential communities that have, people from around the world occupying them, you still have a very consistent white over black social order. Now that white may include people from Cuba, Argentina, Jewish Americans, Anglo Americans. That black may include black Cubans, Haitians, Jamaicans, African Americans. But the data on this is absolutely clear that the biggest variable in determining your fortunes in Miami is whether or not you are black.
And now you have a people who begin to internalize the things that are happening to them in their society as it's our fault because we keep breaking the laws and condition of this liberation. Okay? So we will go deeper into this part of the story, and we will start off in the 1900s. The American people have been free since 1865. So going into the 1900s, a man named Marcus Garvey now comes over to America from Jamaica, and he is shocked by what he sees.
Marcus Garvey changed forever the way black Americans looked at themselves and the world.
He started something that became bigger than Garvey himself. He, more than any other figure in the 20th century, symbolizes the turning of the perception of black people into something positive.